If you type "how much do I need to retire" into a search bar right now, you are going to get an answer that scares you straight back to your desk. Type in a target age of 50 and a $100,000 lifestyle, and most calculators spit out $3,300,000. That number assumes you are paying every dollar of every year for 4 decades on your own, with no help from anyone, ever. That is not a small oversight. It is the accounting equivalent of pretending a pension that pays you for 30-plus years simply does not exist. There is a piece those calculators leave out completely. The single biggest check the government will ever write you does not show up in that math at all. Build it in correctly, and the real number drops from $3,300,000 to $1,700,000. That is a cut of 48%, and it is not a trick. It comes from a 3-bucket structure combined with the right Social Security timing. But there is a catch, and I have watched people miss it. If you ignore what I call the timing illusion, the years between age 50 and 65, when you are paying for your own health insurance, you can lose $24,000 a year in buying power before you ever see a Medicare card. That is enough to quietly wreck a plan that looked perfect on paper. So here is where we are headed. First, the bridge bucket, the exact $640,000 engine that gets you from 50 to 62 without touching Social Security. Then I will show you why the return assumption most advisors use for that bucket is a trap that could leave you back at a desk by 60. To retire at 50 spending $100,000 a year, the number you actually need for the gap years is not $3,300,000. It is $640,000 sitting in what I call the bridge bucket, covering every dollar of spending from age 50 until Social Security opens up at 62. That bucket is not meant to last forever. It is built to spend down to zero, and that is the part people struggle with after 30 years of watching a balance climb. This is not about being cheap. It is about protecting your identity as a provider, making sure the floor under your family never drops. Even if the S&P 500 goes nowhere for a decade, a provider does not need a bucket that grows. A provider needs a bucket that shows up on schedule every single month, no matter what the market is doing that week. Most retirement plans get this piece quietly wrong. Most advisors size this bucket assuming a 3% real return, meaning return after inflation. I would argue for something closer to 2%, a stress test number that assumes the next 12 years will not be kind. The gap between those two assumptions is where a lot of quiet, well-meaning retirement plans fall apart. Years after the spreadsheet said everything was fine, the math is short. You are spending $100,000 a year for 12 years, age 50 to 62. At a 2% real return, that gap costs $640,000. Assume 3% instead, and you would only set aside $600,000. That $40,000 difference does not feel like much on a spreadsheet. It is the difference between a calm 61-year-old and someone back at a desk, updating a resume at 60. This is not a guess either. Real 10-year Treasury yields, the return left after subtracting inflation, sat below zero for most of 2020 and 2021. If your bridge bucket had assumed a comfortable 3% during that stretch, you would have quietly fallen behind your own plan without knowing it, right at the moment you needed that money to be there. Think about it the same way you would think about a mortgage payment. Nobody plans a mortgage around the hope that interest rates stay low forever. You plan around the number that still works if conditions turn against you. A bridge bucket deserves the exact same treatment because, unlike a mortgage, There is no refinancing your way out of a retirement account that ran dry at 58, and no lender is going to work out a payment plan with you at that point. If you are the kind of saver who is tired of retirement math, built on hope instead of stress testing, that is exactly what this channel is for. Ask people what scares them about early retirement, and most say the market. The risk that actually shows up first is health insurance, and it hits earlier than people expect. Call it the timing illusion. Most people assume retirement gets more expensive as you get older, driven by medical bills and nursing care, stacking up in your 70s and 80s. For someone retiring at 50, the opposite is true. The most expensive stretch is the first 15 years, the go-go years, because you are buying health insurance on your own, with no employer picking up part of the bill. I used to tell people to just budget for Cobra and move on. I was wrong. Cobra is a Band-Aid, usually good for 18 months. The real cost shows up when you realize a couple in their 50s can pay $2,000 a month just in premiums before a single doctor's visit. Do that math, and it adds up fast. $2,000 a month is $24,000 a year. Stretch that across the 15 years from age 50 to 65, when Medicare finally starts, and you are looking at $360,000 in premiums alone. On a $100,000 annual budget, that is 24% of every dollar going straight to an insurance company before you have paid for anything else. This is not a small, forgettable line item either. It sits right up there with housing as one of the biggest expenses in the whole plan, and it lands during the exact years when your income is supposed to be at its lowest. Here is the lever most people never pull. Health insurance subsidies under the Affordable Care Act are not a fixed government check. They are calculated off a sliding scale tied to your income for the year, not your net worth. That is why two people with the exact same $1,700,000 sitting in their accounts can pay wildly different premiums for the identical plan, just because one of them reports a lower income. Keep your reported income, your ma-jai, low by pulling spending money from cash or Roth accounts instead of a regular brokerage account or a 401k, and you can turn that $24,000 expense into something closer to $2,000. That single decision which account you draw from can be worth more than almost anything else in this entire plan. That sounds almost too simple, and it raises the obvious question. How do you keep your income low enough to qualify for those subsidies while still spending $100,000 a year to live on? That comes down to which bucket you pull from first, and that is the refill logic we are covering next. It helps to picture it like a thermostat instead of an on-off switch. You are not choosing between full income and no income. You are dialing your reported income up or down each year, the same way you would adjust heat in a house, based on which account the money comes from, and that single dial is worth tens of thousands of dollars over 15 years. 2 buckets down, 1 to go, plus the cash cushion that makes the whole thing work without panic. Bucket 1 is cash, 2 years of spending, $200,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account, earning real interest instead of nothing. Bucket 3 is growth, the remaining $860,000, after you set aside the $640,000 bridge and the $200,000 cash. That is your $1,700,000 total. And Bucket 3 stays fully invested in stocks for the next 28-plus years, untouched, doing what stocks do over long stretches of time. Here is how the 3 buckets work together day to day. You live off Bucket 1, the cash. Every so often, when markets are calm, you refill Bucket 1 from Bucket 2, the bridge. Bucket 3 never gets touched for spending at all. It just compounds in the background for 2 or 3 decades, while you are living off the other two. The reason this matters comes down to timing, not just total dollars. A dollar pulled out of the growth bucket during a down year does far more damage than a dollar pulled out during a good year, because that dollar never gets the chance to recover. Keeping Bucket 3 completely off limits for spending, no matter what the news says that week, is what protects those 28 years of compounding. The rule works precisely because it removes the decision from you in the moment. You are not deciding whether to sell during a scary week. You already decided years earlier that Bucket 3 simply is not an option, and that one decision made in advance does more to protect your retirement than almost any single investment choice you will ever make. That $1,700,000 does not build itself. For someone in their late 40s or 50s pushing hard toward this number, the 2026 401k limit for anyone 50 and older is $32,500 a year between the standard deferral and catch-up contributions, and that is the engine most people use to get there, alongside whatever is sitting in a brokerage account or an IRA. A 3-bucket plan on paper only proves itself under pressure. What happens if the market drops the same week you hand in your notice? Let us run this exact $1,700,000 plan through a repeat of 2008 and see if it survives, because a plan that only works in calm markets is not really a plan at all. Picture 2 people, same $1,700,000, same age, both retiring in the same year. The market decides to open with a 37% drop, the kind of year we saw in 2008. The first person has no buckets, just one big investment account. When the drop hits and the bills keep coming, the mortgage, the car payment, groceries, they sell stocks to cover it, right at the bottom. Their $1,700,000 turns into roughly $1,100,000. And because they sold low to fund daily life, that money never fully catches up, even once the market eventually recovers. The second person built the 3-bucket plan we just walked through. Their bucket 1 is sitting there with $200,000 in cash, untouched by the crash. They keep paying their bills out of that cash for close to 2 years without selling a single share of stock. By the time they need to refill it from the bridge bucket, the market has already started climbing back, and they never had to sell anything at the bottom. Same starting number, same crash, completely different ending, and the only difference is 2 years of cash, sitting on the sideline instead of sitting in the market. Nobody in that second scenario needed perfect timing or a lucky guess about when the bottom would hit. They just needed 2 years of runway already sitting in place before the drop ever happened. This is the part that is easy to underestimate until you have lived through it. It is not about predicting when the next crash happens. It is about making sure that when it does, you are never forced to sell your growth bucket at the exact worst moment just to cover ordinary bills. I do not know if the next downturn is going to be 20% or 50%. Nobody does, no matter how confident they sound. What I do know is that having 2 years of cash you can sleep on is the only thing that keeps you rational when every headline is telling you to panic, and that calm is worth more than any prediction anyone could sell you. There is a 3rd bucket most people forget to count, and it is the one the government builds for you automatically: Social Security. Retire at 50 and you are going to have 12 years where you report $0 in income, and Social Security bases your benefit on your highest 35 years of earnings. Those 12 zero years get averaged in, which pulls the number down some. It does not erase decades of high earnings that came before it. Here is the part that surprises people. Even with 12 blank years in the record, someone who spent their career earning near the maximum taxable amount, $184,500 in 2026, still typically qualifies for somewhere around $30,000 a year, starting at age 62. That $30,000 a year is what lets you finally stop pulling so hard from your own bridge bucket. Full retirement age is 67, and waiting until 70 pays a noticeably bigger monthly check for the rest of your life. For most retirement plans, that is the smarter play. For a $1,700,000 plan built specifically to get someone out at 50, taking Social Security early at 62 does something more valuable than a bigger check later. It becomes the final bridge, taking pressure off your growth bucket right when the balance still needs those next few decades to compound. This is not a universal rule for every retiree. It is a deliberate trade made for this specific plan, and the reasoning behind it matters more than the age on the calendar. The 2026 cost of living adjustment on Social Security is 2.8%, and that detail matters more than people think, because unlike almost every other part of this plan, that $30,000 a year keeps growing with inflation on its own, year after year, without you doing anything at all, year after year, for as long as you live. None of this math matters if you cannot actually bring yourself to spend the money, and that is a real problem for a lot of people, not a character flaw. There is a name for it: loss aversion. After 30 years of watching a balance climb every single month, watching it go down on purpose, even when it is exactly according to plan, can feel like failure. It is not. Most people who struggle with this are not bad with money. They are good with money, which is exactly why the switch feels so uncomfortable. The skill that got you to $1,700,000 is discipline and restraint. And retirement asks you to use a completely different muscle. You have spent your whole working life being the person who saves. Switching to being the person who spends can feel like breaking a rule nobody ever wrote down. If that makes you anxious, that is a completely normal reaction, not a sign you are doing something wrong. One thing that actually helps is a test drive. Before you retire, spend your plantirement budget, the full $100,000 a year pace, for 3 months while you are still working and still bringing in a paycheck. If you cannot bring yourself to spend at that level with income still coming in, you are not going to suddenly feel comfortable doing it once the paycheck stops. Add it up and the plan looks like this: $200,000 in cash for the first 2 years, $640,000 in the bridge bucket, carrying you from 50 to 62, $860,000 left fully invested for growth. That is $1,700,000 total, not $3,300,000. The $3,300,000 number was never really a plan. It was a scare tactic, built on the assumption that you are doing this completely alone, with no Social Security, no strategy for the health insurance gap, and no cash cushion for the next downturn. $1,700,000 is what the same lifestyle actually costs once you build the whole system correctly. None of this makes retiring at 50 easy, and it is not supposed to. It makes the number honest, which is a different thing entirely, and a lot more useful than a headline built to frighten you back to your desk. Every piece of it, the bucket sizes, the health insurance lever, the Social Security timing, interacts with the others. Change one, and the other two have to move too. That is the real work. behind a number like $1,700,000, and it is the same work worth doing, whether your target is $1,700,000 or $700,000. If this kind of retirement math, the real kind, is useful to you, stick around. This channel breaks down exactly this sort of thing every week for people getting serious about the years right before retirement.